Chapter 8, Appendicular Skeleton, Part 1. So, the appendicular skeleton has 126 bones. They seem like a lot of bones. It is a lot of bones. However, luckily, they're all in pairs. So there's basically 63 pairs of bones. This is because of bilateral symmetry. So right side's a lot like the left. So we have right bones and left bones. So that reduces the names a little bit. The function of the appendicular skeleton primarily is movement. It acts as a rigid lever that muscles can then pull on to allow for movement at joints. The pectoral girdles are the structures that attach the upper limbs to the axial skeleton at the sternum. The pelvic girdle is the structure that attaches the lower limbs to the axial skeleton at the sacrum. The pectoral girdle is made up of the clavicle and the scapula, these two bones. And the joint that connects them to the appendicular skeleton to the axial skeleton is at the sternum and clavicles. And that's it. Clavicle is sort of an S-shaped bone, articulates with the sternum at one end and the scapula at the other end. This is the scapula. Scapula, also known as the shoulder blade, rather triangular shaped bone. It has a few structures whose names we need to know. There's the superior border at top, the medial border on the medial side, the lateral border on the lateral side. There's this piece of bone sticking out called the coracoid process that connects directly to the glenoid cavity. Glenoid cavity being a smooth socket that articulates with the head of the humerus to give us the shoulder joint. And then you can also see the acromion process that articulates with the clavicle. In a posterior view, this long ridge here is the spine. So the scapula has a spine, and the spine ends with the acromion process, which again articulates with the clavicle. There's the glenoid cavity where my thumb is. Humerus. Humerus, upper arm bone. It's the funny bone. It's humerus. At the proximal end, it has this smooth rounded knob called the head that articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula to give us the shoulder joint. It has a small rough bump sticking out anteriorly called the lesser tubercle, a larger rough bump sticking out laterally called the greater tubercle, muscles attached by tendons and ligaments to these structures. Then at the distal end, we have rough structures pushing out medial and laterally. These are called the epicondyles. So we have a medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. Medial epicondyles on the same side as the head, because the head always faces medially. Here's the head. That has to be the medial condyle. Next to the medial condyle is a depression, a little pushed-in area called the coronoid fossa. It actually forms space to fit the coronoid process of the ulna when we completely flex at the elbow. Then we have these smooth, rounded structures at the very distal end. This double bump here, that is called the trochlea. Trochlea articulates with the ulna at its trochlear notch. And this smooth knob is called the capitulum. The capitulum articulates with the head of the radius. If we flip the humerus over, we can see this very large fossa down at the distal end called the olecranon fossa. It fits the olecranon process of the ulna when our elbow is fully extended. Up at the proximal end, there's the head again. There's this little line that goes all the way around the head called the neck, so the head and the neck. Ulna. Ulna is one of the bones of our forearm. It is the medial bone when you're in anatomical position. It is connected to the radius, to the lateral bone, by a sheet of connective tissue called the interosseous membrane. The ulna has this little curved area, looks kind of like a U. So here's the ulna, here's that curved area. The inside of that curved area is very smooth. That is the trochlear notch. Trochlear notch goes around the trochlea of the humerus. The bone tissue forming the bottom lip of the trochlear notch, that bone tissue is called the coronoid process. Off to the lateral side is another smooth notch. This is called the radial notch. This is where the head of the radius will connect to the ulna. On the posterior side of the ulna, we see at the proximal end this large rough knob. That is the olecranon process. It's actually the point of your elbow. And then at the distal end, there's this little piece of bone sticking down. That is called the styloid process. And then we have the radius. The radius, again, is the lateral bone of the forearm. The radius at its proximal end has a rounded cylinder called the head. Head articulates with the capitulum of the humerus and the radial notch of the ulna. Distal of that is this large rough patch. This is called the radial tuberosity. Muscles attached there. The distal end on the medial side of the radius is the ulnar notch that fits the head of the ulna. And then there's this little point sticking down. That is the styloid process. So both the radius and the ulna have styloid processes. When we look at the elbow, we see three bones coming together, the humerus, the ulna, and the radius. So at the head of the radius, articulating with the capitulum of the humerus, got the trochlear notch in there of the ulna, wrapping around the trochlea of the humerus. Carpals. Carpals are the wrist bones. These are all short bones. There are 8 carpals. Their names are scaphoid, lunate, tricatrium, pisiform, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. To remember the names is this lovely mnemonic that I recommend you learn. Distal to the carpals is the metacarpals. There are 5 metacarpals named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1 starts with where the thumb is. Thumb 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with the pinky. Metacarpals forms through the palm of the hand. Then we have the phalanges. The phalanges are the finger bones. The phalanges are also numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, 1 starting with the thumb, 5 ending with the pinky. And they're also called proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, and distal phalanx, depending on their order in the finger. Proximal, middle, distal. The thumb does not have a middle phalanx, so it's only proximal and distal. So this bone would be proximal phalanx 1. This would be middle phalanx 2. This would be distal phalanx 3, and so on. So how many bones in one hand? How many phalanges in one hand? Sorry. How many phalanges in one hand? It is 14. All right, moving on to the lower skeleton. This is the pelvic girdle. Pelvic girdle is made up of the 2 hip bones. They are attached to each other at the pubic symphysis, a cartilaginous joint, and they also attach to the sacrum, the part of the axial skeleton. So the pelvic girdle is just the 2 hip bones. And they hold up all the body weight, which is why they're so big, and of course attached to the lower limbs. The hip bone has a long ridge on the top that's very rough called the iliac crest where muscles attach. It has a very large socket called the acetabulum. That's where the head of the femur connects to give us the hip joint. It has this hole here called the obturator foramen where muscles pass through. And then at its inferior end, there's this large rough patch called the ischial tuberosity, which is the part of the hip bone that we actually sit on normally. The hip bone originally was 3 separate bones, the superior bone being called the ilium, the posterior inferior bone called the ischium, the anterior inferior bone called the pubis, so ilium, pubis, ischium. And these fuse around age 23. Iliac crest, part of the ilium. Here's the ischium with its ischial tuberosity. And here is the pubis in the pubic area. Female bones are, pelvic girdles are a bit wider in terms of their outlet than males. Males' outlet is more narrow. This is because females have a wider pubic arch, the connection between the 2 pubis parts of the hip bone, and females have a wider sciatic notch here and here. And this is all, of course, to make room for the head of the infant during childbirth. Femur articulates with the hip bone, articulates with the patella, and articulates with the tibia. The proximal end of the femur has the head, smooth round knob that articulates with the acetabulum to form the hip joint. Below that is the neck. This large rough patch is the greater trochanter. Going down to the distal end, this smooth area here is the patellar surface where it forms a joint with the patella. If we look into the head, we see this little depression here. That is the fovea capitis, which is a ligament attaching the femur to the hip bone inside the hip joint. And down here, this rough patch here is the lesser trochanter. So again, posterior view, we can see the lesser trochanter. Up here's the greater trochanter. There's this ridge running the length of the diaphysis. That is the linea aspera. There are rough patches Here and here, the lateral and medial epicondyles. Again, the medial epicondyle, same side as the head. Head always faces medially, medial epicondyle. Below that are these two smooth rounded knobs called the condyles, medial condyle and lateral condyle. Here's the patella, helps to form the knee. It's embedded in the quadriceps tendon. Here is the tibia, the weight-bearing bone of the lower leg. See, it's rather thick. At its proximal end, it has a medial condyle and a lateral condyle. These are not rounded like most condyles, but they are still considered condyles. Anteriorly, there's this very rough patch called the tibial tuberosity. That's where the patellar ligament attaches. This edge running along the anterior side of the tibia is called the anterior border. And then this extra bit of tissue sticking downward, this is the medial malleolus. So medial malleolus, medial condyle. This tells you this is the medial side, the medial malleolus. And it helps to articulate with the talus. Fibula. Fibula is a thin bone. It does not carry any weight, so it doesn't need to be thick. At its proximal end, this has a blocky head, articulates with the tibia. At its distal end, it has this rounded structure called the lateral malleolus that articulates with the talus. So the fibula has a lateral malleolus. The foot. Foot has the 7 tarsals. The 7 tarsals make up the ankle. They include the talus that the tibia and fibula connect with. That forms the ankle joint. It includes the calcaneus, which is the heel bone. It includes the cuboid, the navicular, and the 3 cuneiforms, medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiforms. The bones forming the tarsals and metatarsals help to give the foot naturally 2 arches, a longitudinal arch going across and a transverse arch going along its length. The arches of the foot are important because they support the weight of the body, steering the weight ideally so that we can get the most work out of our feet when we're walking, and also provides some leverage when walking. Some people do have flat feet, which means they do not have these arches. Metatarsals are the bones going between the tarsals to the phalanges. Metatarsals are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 starts where the big toe or great toe is. Metatarsal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The phalanges, again, just like in the hand, they are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 starts with the great toe, 5 ends with the pinky toe. They go proximal, middle, distal. So this bone here is proximal phalanx 1, middle phalanx 2, distal phalanx 3, and again, the big toe does not have a middle phalanx. So there's only 14 phalanges on 1 foot. And that is the end of this lecture.